This is the Stacking Days Podcast, the podcast about the healing experience of recovery for people of color by people of color. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. We suggest you seek out the support of a trained professional for guidance with your specific circumstance. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, and I've been alcohol-free since September 2021. Welcome to the show. Hey y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days Podcast. Your host, Ray Donovan here. You know, this is an interesting episode, and as you all know, for those who've been listening to the Stacking Days Podcast, it's a relatively young project, right? So, you know, we're only, a handful of episodes in here, but I wanted to do something a little bit differently today for a couple different reasons. Number one, for those of you who don't know, April is Sexual Assault and Awareness Month. So I wanted to call that out only from the standpoint where, we talk a lot about healing. We talk a lot about growth on the Stacking Days Podcast. And I think that this is one avenue and one aspect that particularly for, communities of color, we oftentimes don't really talk a lot about openly. So I wanted to take an opportunity to use this platform to speak a little bit about that. And then, yes, in addition to that, we're also going to be talking about how alcohol played a role in that. And then secondly, my guest today is one of the first folks who actually reached out to me to actually come on the show proactively and share his story. And I never want to be in a position where I mute anybody from being able to share their experience in the world, particularly as it relates to them pursuing healing, as to them pursuing well-being. And especially if on the other side of their traumas, they're able to bring light to the world. So the brother that we have on today, Darnell Rice, we have with us. He is the founder and program director of Embrace Elevate, and I'll have him tell you a little bit more about this. And because this is a little bit of an unconventional episode, we're going to play it by ear here, and we're going to have an organic conversation. So without further ado, let me introduce and bring Darnell to the mic. Darnell, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ray. Guys, I want to tell you something. Think about a little boy. Who's going to cry for me? That little boy inside of me. Who's going to cry for me when I'm battered and bruised? Who's going to cry for me when I don't see any days? Who's going to cry for me when I need to stand up? Guys, I'm Darnell Rice, and like you said, I'm the founder and program director for Embrace. It is a survivor-led program where we tackle sexual violence and rape, but we also tackle unhealthy and healthy relationships as it relates to Black boys, Black men, and their families. Because, believe it or not, we need to have a platform and a voice. It all started back in 2019 when I was sitting in my trailer and I was crying out to the Creator, and I said, listen, I need help, and I didn't know what to do. I can remember a couple of people that I talked to that were like, hey, you have a story. You have something to bring to the world. And I was able to really get on stage and tell my story. I was the only Black man on stage to tell a story. That took a lot of courage. So I've been on this healing journey for some time now. And that's why Embrace was born. Embrace wasn't born out of my childhood trauma.
Well, I appreciate that, Darnell. We're going to get obviously much further into that founding story, that origin story. And then also, one of the things that I think is important to highlight for the purposes of Stacking Days is how alcohol played a role in your story. Even though you weren't directly struggling from, an addiction or a substance use disorder yourself, there are some very, very prevalent aspects of how addiction and others' addiction around you played into your own trauma. So maybe for the next little bit, if you can rewind it all the way back and give folks a sense of what is Darnell's story? What is that little boy's story of trauma? And also in that, how did alcohol play a role in your trauma from a young age?
So when I think back at childhood, I think back in inception when I was in my mother's womb, and my mother and father were in a domestic violence relationship. And so my father had passed away at the age of 4. And so I remember when I was sitting on his lap and he said, son, I'm sorry for not being here for you. And then he turned to my mom and said, please don't give my son to the streets. I didn't really understand as a little boy what was going on. But at that point, I remember that my father was getting ready to die, and so fast forward a little bit, and then here comes my mom, and my mom met this guy that she fell in love with, thought that he was God's gift, but he struggled with addiction, alcohol. And I remember times where he would get intoxicated so bad to where he would lash out violently against my mother and myself. And so I would get beatings all the time, like all the time. It could be he'd come in from work and he would just beat on me and my mom. And this went over a period of years. So just imagine him, dealing with his own trauma. I don't know what his childhood was like, but I know one thing, that he struggled really bad with alcohol. And so I would have to just cover myself. I would have to make sure that my mom was okay. And I had to endure a lot of abuse. And so, as I got older and stuff like that, I really realized that, addictions are tied to childhood trauma.
Yeah. No, I mean, clearly, that's part of your story, right? I mean, you can't dispute that addiction can definitely be a part of someone's childhood trauma. How long, if you don't mind, and I don't want to spend too much time in this space. I know this is your work and you talk about this often, but I don't want to, run the risk of triggering anyone who might be, listening to the podcast either.
Right.
But how long did this go on for you, as a youth?
It went on for, let's see, I'll say about close to 5 years. It was very triggering, man. It was very chaotic, very toxic environment. Losing my father was really a pivotal point in my life. Yeah. And so basically my mom put this man above her children. Now she wasn't married to now, but it was a point of he was God. And so he literally, when I tell you, I used to crawl up in a ball, and I used to be in my bed and I said, he isn't there. He isn't there over and over and over again, because I didn't want to be beaten severely. And I used to get severe beatings.
Now, is this individual, did he also sexually abuse you, or was it primarily physical abuse?
Primarily physical, emotional, and mental abuse.
Okay.
And I got enough courage as a young man at 8. And I had my Louisville Slugger. I'm a baseball fan. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. And I told him, I said, you touch my mama one more time, I'm going to kill you. And he was like, no, he was scared. I was like, yeah, because I had got enough courage, because I was tired of my mom getting abused, and I was tired of getting beatings, man. I would get beaten so bad to where I would have whelps. It was bad. I was going to school with whelps and everything, man.
That sounds like a horrible reality to have to experience, as someone, who is, just developing and trying to find, their early place in life. So, hard to hear for sure. I mean, especially, me being, a parent, and, we're talking a little bit about this before, the call, imagining, my son, who's, about to be 5 now, being in a circumstance where, that could be his reality is gut wrenching to hear, honestly. So I'm sorry that you had to experience that at such a young age. Let's fast forward in your story, and let's continue to give us a sense of where you are coming from and what has brought you here to today.
So like I said, Embrace was born in my trailer. Mm-hmm. I was working a dead end job. I was working at Avis Budget. And I just sat in my room and I just cried out. I want someone to hear my story, hear my truth. And at that moment, I had started dealing with a lot of different issues in my life. I don't really talk about it, but as far as like relationships, marriages, not loving myself, because I didn't have a mother's love. I didn't have a father's love. I had father wounds, man. It's real. But I did have a grandmother's love. And she really taught me love, support, compassion. She was my biggest supporter. And God rest her soul. I just lost her 2 years. It'd be 2 years coming up in, it was 2 years, February 21st of this year. And so,
I'm sorry.
yeah, man, she's God. Yeah, she good, bro. I'm just living out her legacy. So with Embrace, I knew Embrace had to be born because I didn't want a little boy that's inside of me or the little boys and girls that I see on an everyday basis not have to go through the turmoil and pain that I went through as a child. Imagining your son, 5 or 6 years old, going through that and then not having an opportunity to grow and have his childhood years. I never had a childhood, man.
So I mean, how did you? So I understand the inception of Embrace, but I would imagine that even before Embrace, you had to start embracing your own growth and your own healing.
Yeah.
How did you enter into that space to start healing yourself from a lot of the trauma that you experienced? Ultimately, then to also maybe pass those tools on to other folks, and other young people who potentially are suffering from their own traumas.
So this what happened. I remember I was working, like I said, working at Avis Budget. I was actually in my master's degree program. I lost everything. I rode the bus. I walked. Now this is in my master's program. And I remember going into an event with a classmate. His name is Tim. God bless Tim. And he said, I want you to go to this barbecue with me. So I met one of my mentors and colleagues, and he runs an organization, and that's my full time. And so, he was like, I want you to come work for me. And I can remember, he believing in me. He said, man, let's talk. And I told him my story. He said, man, you got a powerful story. And, Lorenzo Lewis, that's his name, the Confessed Project of America. He was able to take me in, and he was able to help me develop and grow and start the healing process because I needed an organization that looked like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was able to, he saw the need. He saw my purpose, and he saw like, man, this brother's working hard. This brother's a good brother. I need him. And so I remember going on the road with him, and I just started crying out. And I was like, man, and he said, Darnell, you need to heal. Maybe go to therapy. Maybe go, and I started to really recognize that I had an initiative inside of me. And so that's how our Embrace came about, because my mother was sexually assaulted at 12 and I was sexually assaulted at 6. So it was generational. And so I knew then that I had something special, and I knew that I had to heal. I had to, because not because of me, but for generations that are going after me and before me. And even men that I talk to 30, 40, 50 years old that have not even expressed any type of to say, hey, I have been that child. I have been that young adult that has been violated, as because we as men, it's taboo. We don't talk about it. But Embrace is here to give survivors that platform, especially men and boys, to say, hey, you can start the process. You can, this is your vulnerable space. This is your space. You don't have to feel like, you don't have to say, oh, I'm not a man. I am a man.
How often, I mean, it's amazing to think about where you have men who've almost lived their entire lives, but, are essentially shut off from wanting to confront this pain, right? Mm-hmm. That is so prevalent in the back of their minds, that they just don't even know how to attack healing on. Do you find, and this is out of my own curiosity, and only because I've read that oftentimes, folks who have mental health issues, obviously, are susceptible to addictions, substance use. In our community, particularly for Black men who are struggling from, trying to reconcile their own the abuse that has been put on them. Do you often find that these men are, find themselves self-medicating, through alcohol to be able to deal with some of the pain that they've experienced in their lives?
Certainly. Definitely. I really feel that, and I see it and I hear it, because at the end of the day, we all have our concerns, and we do self-medicate. That's what a lot of survivors of any type of trauma self-medicate to ease the pain and think and say, oh, it's going to go away. No, we got to really do some internal healing. But sometimes you got to recognize that by people that you love, to say, hey, I I need for you to heal because there's people that need to hear from you. You're on this purpose. You're on this purpose walk. You're on this journey of purposeful work and walk. I have a niche, but at the same time, I have a purpose, and I'm living out my purpose because it's people that need to hear from me. And my journey and my healing is every day. It's every day. I still get triggers, but I have tools available so I can understand, okay, I have this trigger, but guess what? I know how to diffuse the trigger, and I know how to move beyond the trigger.
Well, I'm interested. Let's talk about, your toolkit, right? Because I think that, even though this podcast is about, substance use disorders and alcoholism and addiction, there's probably some real valuable tools that you use in combating, your residual traumas that can be applied really to anybody who's trying to step into a brighter light. So, maybe you can share with the listeners a little bit about what are some of those tools that you turn to in order to diffuse the triggers, in order to step into your healing.
So, well, first off is meditation, 5 to 10 minute meditation before you even start your day. Really taking the time to really soak in your environment, your presence. No TV, no phone, just meditation. Deep breaths, meditating. It takes time. I know some people that meditate 15, 20, 30 minutes. But when you're starting out meditating, really sitting down in the moment, really taking it in. Don't be worried about what's around you. Make sure you're in a safe place. But meditation is key. Number 2, affirmations. Speaking positive affirmations over yourself, over your life. Tuning out the noise. Not specifically looking at what's bad in your life. Focusing on what's good in your life. Speaking to the universe of, okay, I am great. I am healing. I am restoration. I am beautiful. I am handsome. Speaking those positive affirmations over yourself daily. And this could be 5 minutes. What I do is I do positive affirmations each day. And I also journal too, every day too, and reflect on my day, because it's good to really use that as a tool to where sometimes we just need to write it out
of our heads.
Yeah. Number 3, boundaries. Setting boundaries with yourself and your family members or friends. That's hard because we as men, we run so much. We take care of everybody else, but we got to take care of ourselves first. You're a father. You got to take care of yourself first. Then you'll be able to take care of your children and your wife. We don't do that. Self-care. Number 4, doing something. And I'm not talking about going and get no beer, nothing like that. I'm just saying, what I'm saying is really do something for yourself, whether it's taking in a movie, whether it's going to get you, going to eat, going to get you your favorite meal or going to get you some ice cream, buying yourself something, really honoring yourself. Because we as men, we don't honor ourselves. We don't get pedicures. We don't get manicures. We don't take care. No, get a haircut, take care of yourself. Because at the end of the day, we as men have so much pressure on us that we got to take care of ourselves. We got to be here because we have a mission. We have an obligation. We have people that we need to reach. And if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be, we'll have an early death. Right? And that's just real.
Yeah. there's definitely, when you change the focus and the lens and put it on yourself, because as you said, if you're not able to better yourself, you're not going to be good to anybody that's around you. And I think that the similarity here, you talk about meditation, you talk about affirmations, journaling, boundary, self-care. Those are all the same things that, that depending on who you are can also be part of your toolkit, if you happen to be struggling with substance use, because a lot of times, folks who resort to substances that we already talked about do so because of some sort of trauma, do so because there's a little person kind of trapped inside that was never nurtured. So how do you then go ahead and reparent yourself and nurture yourself in your adult age so that you can live that life of truth that we all want to. We sometimes just don't give ourselves the license to be able to do so. Yeah,
and not only that too, right? You think about your toolkit, but also remembering that It's okay not to be okay.
Right.
Do I have 10s every day? No, I don't. But I have each day that I live is an opportunity to be better than I was yesterday. And as a
Yeah.
survivor, I take that each and every day. I may not be a 10 every day, but I'm a survivor. I'm a champion. I'm a victor. I'm not a victim, because I had to speak to the little boy and tell him it's okay. You can rest now.
I love that, man. I mean, it takes a certain degree of like self truth to be able to step into that, right? And say, you know, I'm going to release you from the pain as best as I can in my
Yes.
more mature years, right? Talk to me about Embrace and a lot of the work that you're doing now. I am very curious about, you know, the Black boys, the Black men, and I know that you also work with a lot of women of color, you know, as well, who are survivors in their own right. Can you just kind of give us a sense of what work you're up to today, and what you're seeing in our community as it relates to surviving, you know, sexual traumas, generational traumas of that nature? Because I think it's important to also highlight, similar to, you know, what we talk about on this show, in there not really being a safe space for representation, you know, of, you know, people of color as it relates to, you know, struggles with a substance. It sounds to me that that's also very prevalent, you know, in your world as well. So I'd love to hear a lot more about the work that you do in order to kind of, push that stigma to the side and make people feel comfortable to step into their light.
So, you know, what we typically do at Embrace is, you know, we're a survivor-led program. And what we do is we utilize storytelling as a way to connect with our audience. We also use, you know, presentations and workshops. Presentations that we do is consent, speak up and speak out. And then we have also a prevention, advocacy, and stigma presentation as well. And we also have a clergy component to where we talk about beyond the veil, sacred betrayal, where we talk about how parishioners can really effectively help their parishioners as it relates to trauma in regards to sexual trauma as well, but to make sure that the clergy understands of how to stay out of scandal. And so, you know, as we work with survivors. Our biggest thing is, how does healing happen? So we talk about triggers. We talk about mental health. We talk about mental health 101. We talk about, you know, the different therapies. We talk about consent. You know, what does consent look like? Because a lot of what consent looks like to me doesn't look the same in my counterparts' community. Because a lot of our young people, a lot of our men, our women, they don't understand and don't know the importance and the powerfulness of consent, of saying consent is a yes or no. It's not no, yeah, no. It's a yes or no. It's clear cut. Both parties have to be in agreement. So typically that's how we measure our impact, by pre and post test, but we do testimonials. But we really honor the survivors in the space, making sure that they have a voice, but making sure just give them something that they need. Embrace basically speaks to the community, and then until the community will tell Embrace what they need. And basically we're a resource too. We're connected to resources. So say for instance, like in Little Rock, we have a lot of agencies. I can't do everything. I can't. I'm not going to do that. That's not my job. But what I can do is offer, support services like, okay, if I have someone that's needing housing or needing, utility assistance, I can point them in the right direction and say, hey, I got somebody over with utility assistance, or, someone that has, that may need some assistance in housing. I got organizations that do that as well. So I got like a list of resources as well too, like a resource list. And then, of course, we have the national resources such as RAIN, the National Sexual Assault Hotline, but Embrace is a resource as well, too. We have a Embrace You support group for our survivors as well. That's men and women. So, as far as, that's a safe space, too, as well. And so we utilize other community like-minded organizations to say, hey, how can we partner together? How can I help you help me? Basically, it's not a one size fits all. It's okay, how can I be a service to you, but also just make sure that you have these different resources. Because when I was in my recovery, I was not able to really focus on my trauma because I couldn't have my 5 basic needs. I was working a dead end job. I was making $9.25 an hour. So I'm not worried about my mental health. I'm not even worried about healing from my sexual trauma because I was not able to. I didn't have the capacity to do that, to really heal and really say, you know what? I need to really heal and take it really seriously like I need to. But it took a vehicle. It took someone saying, you know what, Darnell, here you are. Here's where you wanted to go. You got this opportunity. Because I never thought that God would give me embrace. I never thought it. But he saw fit for me to definitely found this organization, and say, hey, I'm giving it to you. So I tell people, when God gives you something, you cultivate it, you honor it, and you give it to the world. It's a lot of organizations that are doing great work. I can only focus on Embrace and do what Embrace is here to do. And that's to provide a beacon of hope to the people, but also be here as a support system.
I love that you made that call out, that it was very difficult for you to pursue your own healing because you didn't have your basic needs met, right? Like, I feel like particularly in, communities of color, we spend so much time just trying to make ends meet and make sure that our basic needs are met, that oftentimes even those things that we were talking about before, all the self-care, all of that is not even in consideration because it's just not the priority. The priority is, how am I going to keep a roof over my head? How am I going to put, food on the table? How am I going to make sure that my kids are taken care of? All of those things. So I appreciate you making that distinction, because I think that runs true for many struggles, within, the communities of color, is, trying to just take care of those basic necessities first before even pursuing, anything else.
Yeah, because I think back on my journey, man. Like, I went from making $9.25 an hour, because I also worked in the prison system as a college professor, and getting a car for $1, and just making a turnaround because I knew the purpose that was on my life, and I said, I got something special, and I'm gonna tell you something. So Embrace acronym is elevate, motivation, believe, redemption, acceptance, courage, and empower. That's our acronym for Embrace. I don't know if you can see my shirt, but my shirt,
I got you.
The A is my mother. Her favorite color was red, but you don't see the halo.
I can see it.
She got her wings,
That's
man.
awesome.
So basically, it's in honor of her as well too, because she didn't get a chance to heal. The little girl inside of her didn't get a chance to heal. And so it's so important that as we go through our life, especially with Embrace really honors the little boy and the little girl, man.
I mean, I love that, man. And just love what you're doing. I wanted to ask you about the word, like, about shame.
Okay.
Right. And the reason why I want to bring up shame is because I think that's one of those universal, unifying kind of words that a lot of folks who are in a struggle can prescribe their struggle to, or at least not wanting to be vocal about their struggle because there is that degree of shame. Right. I know that's true for people who suffer in, substance use addiction. I'm sure that that's also true for people who are struggling with their, sexual abuse traumas that they've experienced, and sharing those stories. And in my own experience, and you might be able to attest to this as well, is that there's a huge weight that is lifted from one's shoulder when you're able to be outwardly expressive about what has happened to you, or how you have been living your life thus far. I mean, it's been part of my journey, right? And just being vulnerable and expressive. So I am curious, in your work, how do you support folks in crossing that threshold of vulnerability so that they can encounter and fight that shame that's been holding them back in being in pursuing their own healing? Because I mean, it's one thing to have like the venue, right? But it's another thing to be able to embrace the venue and embrace the opportunity and be vocal about some of the darker aspects that you maybe have been keeping secret in a lot of ways from people who are you're close to, and folks that are around you. So how do you coach people and bring them along that journey so that shame plays a smaller part in their life than maybe it once did?
Well, first of all, I let them know that embrace is a brave space.
A brave space.
That I honor them in the space. That is confidentiality. Like, if you're not ready to share, it's okay. But letting them know that, you have an opportunity to express yourself in a healthy, positive way, but not pressuring them to share, but always letting them know, like, we have to start the healing process with you. And that's where I had to come. I had to come to a medium and say, you know what? I think about Antoine Fisher. That's my life, man. I used to couldn't watch that movie, man. I would boo-hoo and cry because I still was dealing with trauma. And so I always make sure that survivors are valued, appreciated, and loved and heard. But just letting them know that, you can share, but you also can share and have that opportunity of love. Because, when you think about sexual trauma, man, it is a shame behind it, especially being a man. We don't talk about that.
Right.
But at the same time, I was vulnerable enough to be the new sexy, to say, hey, I'm going to step out on faith, and I don't really care what people say. I had to get to a point of letting people understand and know, like, who cares? I'm somebody else's hope at the end of the day. And that's how I had to look at it, because I knew just by my story, I have an audience. I have a voice. I have a mantle. And that's why I go so, so diligent, so purposeful with Embrace, because just think about if I had Embrace when I was a kid.
Or even knew that it existed and people were out there struggling with a lot of the same stuff you were.
Yeah, exactly. That right. And then I think about my father. I don't touch on my father, but I believe my father had some type of trauma too. Just found out my aunt did too. She had some trauma as well. So it can be generational, but I'm a curse breaker. When I think about breaking a curse, that means that I'm going to break the curse and I'm going to do something differently.
No, that makes sense. When you talk about, the generational trauma, I think the challenge in generational trauma, specifically in communities of color, is that oftentimes you absorb that trauma and you didn't even know it existed for the generation before you. So like you're talking about, how you just found out that, that your aunt was also, is also a survivor, maybe of abuse, right? I don't know how old your aunt is.
Man, 70 plus, man.
Right. So, she spent left her whole life with not expressing that. Now, did she express that because you started to become vocal in your own journey?
No, I found this out by another family member and stuff like that and everything. And so I was like, wow, so it really got me to thinking that, my father had been, and maybe not involved, but maybe had some type of trauma that was done to him. So it's just, I've been uncovering a lot of stuff on my daddy's side of the family. And so just all that trauma. And so even on my mama's side, it's just like, wow, all this trauma. And then it's like, okay, you have to start somewhere. And I tell anybody that's going to be listening, just remember that healing is every day. Healing has to be uncomfortable. Healing has to start with you. But just remember that you are not a damaged good.
Yeah. I think that that's a message that I'm sure someone listening can hear, right, and needs to hear, regardless of what your struggle is, because we are talking about healing. So I appreciate you making that call out. I want to ask you, and I always have, a few questions as we kind of start to wrap up here. And usually when I ask these questions, again, by nature of the Stacking Days podcast, it usually revolves around alcohol. But I think that what we're talking about is healing, right? And we're talking about well-being. And I think that it kind of transcends across communities of color, that oftentimes, it's almost too late when we find out that somebody's been struggling with something, and do they prematurely, they taking their own lives? We see that time and time again in our communities, right? For the pain that they're trying to address and haven't figured avenues out for it. I am curious for you, and maybe this is around the time where you met Lorenzo, and you have a really great answer for this. But how would folks who are on the outside looking in at Darnell known that you were struggling with something at the time when you were struggling with it, and maybe you weren't verbal as you are today about some of your past struggles? How would they have known to be there and to be supportive of you?
Well, it just all goes back to just, picking up the body language, the body cues. If you around someone long enough and you know them and you honor them, what's going on. That's just like, think about it. If you've been around me and I'm a guy, I'm always laughing, talking, all of a sudden now my whole countenance and my face has changed. Something's going on, and so it was just a matter of me really opening up and really just understanding, like, man, I really do need to heal. I really do need to focus on my healing journey because I knew the assignments. This is an assignment, man. This is embraces my assignment for the people, man.
I love that. In honor of Sexual Assault and Awareness Month, and in honor of survivors who are listening and who may listen, years down the line, because this podcast will live on, hopefully long after you and I are gone. What would you suggest for someone who is sitting there in their darker moments and, they want to pursue healing, they want to take the first steps in addressing, their traumas? What would you suggest to that person who just doesn't know the direction to go? That little black boy, that little black girl, like, what would you say to them in bringing them into a space where they can start pursuing their own healing?
I would let them know that Embrace cares. Letting them know it's somebody that truly wants to see you heal. It has to be someone that you love and that you support, or maybe even a stranger that can help you say, you know what? I see the little boy. I see the little girl inside of you. It's time to rest now. It's time to start the healing process. Just really letting them know, like, the world is not ending. It's just beginning.
Well, I think you're definitely a great example of that, right? And I think that the more opportunity you have to share your message, it's only going to help people, which is why I wanted to have you on. I really do appreciate it. Darnell, let us know where folks can find you, where you can find the work that you're doing.
Man, I'm gonna tell you, man. Hey, everybody go to www.embraceelevate.com. Follow me on Instagram, embrace_elevate. But also make sure you follow me on Facebook as well. Also, Embrace You as a support group for survivors, and just anybody, if you want to definitely stay connected with me, definitely connect with me on my website. You can also connect with me at embraceelevate44@gmail.com. And if you know of any organizations that would love to talk about, healing, talk about consent, also do speaking engagements, and also work with high schools, middle schools, organizations. I even work with corporate organizations too, as well.
Well, look, Darnell, I appreciate the conversation, man. I know it's been, some time. We've been trying to get it on here and get it in the making. But thank you, brother, for joining us. And, I think that, I'll make sure that the resources that you mentioned are in the show notes. So if there is anybody who happens to watch or listen to the episode, rather, and they're looking for resources and they're ready to kind of step in a new direction as it relates to some of this, this trauma, that, there's something there that they can latch on to. And I think that it's always great to give, individuals a starting point, right? It may not be the end point, but at least they have a starting point. And so I'm glad that you've been able to join us to share that with the listeners.
Well, thank you, Ray, for having me. And, I really enjoy Stacking Days, man. This you're gonna be worldwide one of these days, brother.
Well, look, we'll take it one day at a time, like so many other things that we do in life, right?
Right.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate it. We obviously will stay connected, and thanks again for your time, man.
Awesome. You too.
Thank you for listening to the Stacking Days podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, email me at rdg@stackingdays.com or follow us on Instagram at stackingdays. If you like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, and by all means share it with a friend who you think needs to be invited into the conversation. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.